Hello, I'm Jessie. I hope you subscribe to the channel. The story begins with a little boy named Pete, who was on a trip to the forest with his mom and dad. Pete was holding a storybook in his hand and reading it. The story was called The Adventures of Elliot, and Elliot was the dog in the tale. After Pete finished the story, he talked with his mom, and they joked together. His dad, who was focused on driving the car, suddenly saw a gazelle in front of them. At that moment, his dad couldn't control the car, and they flipped over in the forest. We discover that they all died except for Pete. He picked up his books from the ground, but didn't know what to do. When he couldn't find a solution, he decided to enter the forest. As soon as he entered, the wolves heard his voice and gathered around him, ready to eat him. Suddenly, a huge voice echoed, causing the wolves to flee from the scene. We discover that the voice belonged to a massive dragon living in the forest. When Pete saw the dragon, he was very terrified, afraid that the dragon would eat him. But strangely, the dragon didn't do that. In fact, its behavior suggested that it liked Pete. The dragon opened its arms for Pete to come up and take him with it. At that moment, Pete was puzzled. He had no other choice since his parents were gone, and he didn't know what to do. He indeed went with the dragon. From that moment, 6 years passed, and during all that time, Pete lived with the dragon in the forest, which raised and protected him from wild animals. Pete named the dragon Elliot after the dog in his story. They played every day and explored the entire forest. One day, while they were playing, they saw a strange girl in the forest, and the dragon disappeared so the girl wouldn't see it. The power of invisibility was one of its abilities. Pete also hid behind a tree and kept watching the girl to see what she would do. He was very curious since it had been a long time since he had seen a human. The girl's name was Grace, and she worked in forest protection. She was holding a compass, but when she let it go, Pete approached her and took the compass because he liked its appearance. At that moment, Grace didn't notice him. She was marking trees that shouldn't be cut down in the forest. However, she heard a sound around her, and, when she looked around but saw nothing, she didn't pay it any mind and walked away. Throughout all this time, Pete was watching her until he was sure she had left the area. When night came, Elliot and Pete returned to their cave and slept, ending their day like that. The next day, Pete woke up early because he heard a sound coming from the forest. When he looked at the dragon, he found it asleep and unable to wake up. So he decided to leave it sleeping and went to see what was happening. When Pete reached the sound, he found a team of workers cutting down trees and loading them onto trucks. The foreman was named Jiven. At the same time, Grace arrived, coming to warn Jack not to cut down all the trees in the area. Jack was Jiven's brother and worked with them in the lumber industry. Jack and Grace were engaged and were going to get married soon. When Grace told him not to cut the trees, Jack replied that it wasn't in his hands and that his brother, Given, was the one insisting on cutting down all the trees. Jack had his daughter, Natalie, with him in the truck. She was from his first wife. Natalie decided to get out and explore the forest. While she was looking at the trees, she spotted Beat. As soon as Beat realized she saw him, he ran away from the spot. Natalie chased after him, and for Beat, it was just a game. He wasn't scared of her at all. After a long chase, Beat reached a big tree and climbed up it. Natalie followed him. When she tried to climb higher, her feet slipped and she fell onto a branch. As soon as Beat heard her scream, he quickly came down to help her. He grabbed her hands and tried to pull her up, but he couldn't, and she fell from him. Luckily, since the distance wasn't far, Natalie wasn't hurt. After that, they got to know each other, and Natalie learned his name was Beat. At the same time, Jack and Grace arrived at the scene because they heard Natalie screaming. When Jack saw Natalie, he asked her what she was doing there and why she had gone into the forest. She told them she was chasing Beat and pointed at him. When they all looked and saw him, they were very surprised and confused about how this little boy was living in the forest. Grace tried to approach him, reassuring him not to be afraid. When she got closer, she noticed her compass hanging around his neck. At that moment, she got angry and asked him to return the compass. Beat was frightened and ran away quickly to escape. While climbing a tree, Given caught him and pulled him down. Beat fell from the tree, hit his head on the ground, and passed out. After a while, the dragon woke up. When he didn't find Beat next to him, he went out to look for him and searched the entire forest, but couldn't find him. Shortly after, he heard the workers' voices, so he went to the place where they were working, hoping to find Beat. At that moment, he heard Given say that Grace had taken Beat to the hospital. The dragon leaned against a tree, and that tree couldn't withstand it and fell in front of Given. Given looked at the place where the tree had fallen and noticed something moving inside. His curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to take his men and go hunt that creature. Beat was in the hospital, and as soon as he regained consciousness, he was very confused and didn't understand where he was. Grace and Natalie arrived at the hospital to check on Beat and reassure him. When they reached Beat's room, they found he wasn't there. He had escaped through the window. Beat kept running down the street, not knowing what to do, and all he cared about was getting back to the forest. Unfortunately, the police caught up with him, and he was hopping on cars to escape. But in the end, he entered a closed area and couldn't find a way out. When Grace arrived, she hugged him and tried to calm him down. The strange thing was that as soon as Beat was caught, he started making bizarre sounds like the wolves. The police officers were puzzled by what he was doing, while Given and his men were still in the forest, searching for the creature that had caused the tree to fall. All the time they were searching, the dragon was around them, but remained hidden, observing. However, Given reached the dragon's cave and found the story of Bite inside. When he exited the cave, the dragon was standing in front of him. As soon as he noticed the story in Given's hand, the dragon became furious, appeared before them, and began to charge at them. Naturally, Given and all his men ran away quickly until they reached their vehicles. Throughout all this, the dragon chased after them, but didn't want to harm anyone. Given and his men managed to get into their vehicle and quickly fled the forest. All of this was part of the dragon's plan to get into their vehicle and reach Bait. Dries was trying to calm Bait and made a pact with him that he could stay at her place tonight, and she would take him back to the forest herself the next day. Bait, having grown fond of her, agreed to stay with her. That night, he played with Natalie, running around the house. When they sat down to rest, Bite began to tell Natalie about his friend, the dragon. Natalie didn't believe him, so he decided to draw it for her. Meanwhile, the dragon kept an eye on Given to find Bite. When he reached the city, he went to Jack's house and told him what had happened in the woods. However, Jack didn't believe him and suggested that he looked tired from work and should go to sleep, promising to talk the next day. Given was very upset because his brother didn't believe him, so he took his car and left. When the dragon reached Jack's house, he expected to find Bait waiting for him, but when he looked through the window, he saw Bait sitting among them, playing and happy to be with them. At that moment, he felt affected and realized that this was Bait's place. He decided to leave and return to the cave, but all night he sat sad, expecting that Bite would forget him and never return. The next day, Dries prepared Bite to take him back to the forest as promised. She was curious to see the dragon, so she asked Bite if they could take someone with them. He said it was no problem. The person Dries brought was her father, who loved dragons very much and had claimed to have seen one when he was young. They all reached the forest, and as soon as Bait got out of the vehicle, he ran to find the dragon. Natalie, Dries, and her father ran after him. Bait finally reached the cave and entered to find the dragon. When Bait came out again, he told them not to be afraid because the dragon would come out for them. When the dragon emerged behind Bait, they were all surprised and terrified by what they saw. The dragon was peaceful and didn't harm them. Natalie approached the dragon and began to play with him, while Dries and her father watched, happy with what they saw. Unfortunately, at that moment, Given appeared, intending to hunt the dragon. Given and all his men started throwing tranquilizer darts at the dragon, tying him by the neck and trying to restrain him. However, the dragon managed to break free from the ropes and attempted to fly away, but he couldn't escape because the effect of the darts kicked in, and the dragon collapsed in front of them. Given seized the opportunity and took the dragon back to the city, which was a tremendous achievement. Upon arriving in the city, Given placed the dragon in storage and said he needed to call the reporters to come and document what he had. Jack didn't like what was happening, so he called the police to come deal with Given. Meanwhile, Natalie and Bait were thinking of a way to rescue the dragon from the storage. The police arrived, but fortunately, Bait and Natalie managed to enter through an opening at the top of the storage. When they entered to free the dragon, Bait kept urging him to fly quickly, but unfortunately, the dragon couldn't move because he was still sedated and unable to control his strength. The police confronted Given and asked him to let them into the storage to see what was going on inside. Jivan tried to open the storage door, but it was locked from the inside, so he had his men break the door down to get in. Once they entered, they found nothing inside the storage, and the vehicle that had the dragon was empty. At that moment, the officer declared it a false alarm, and there was no dragon. When Jivan discovered that the storage was empty, he panicked and ran out to see where the dragon had gone. Meanwhile, Dries noticed that Bite and Natalie were in the vehicle, and when she focused on the vehicle, she realized that the dragon was on it but was hidden. At that moment, she closed the door behind them to think of a plan to save the dragon. Natalie and Bite couldn't find a way to rescue the dragon except to drive the vehicle he was on into the forest. The problem was that both were too young and didn't know how to drive. Fortunately, Dries's father arrived and told Natalie and Bite that he would help them drive the truck to escape. He indeed started the vehicle and drove it out of the storage. The police and reporters saw everything that happened and watched as they escaped with the truck carrying the dragon. At that moment, Jivan and everyone else ran to their vehicles to catch up with the truck. When Jivan reached the truck, he demanded that they pull over and claimed that the dragon was his, and that he had hunted it. Dries's father ignored his words and continued on his way. Jivan, trying to stop the truck, ran quickly and blocked it in the middle of the road, expecting Dries's father to halt when he saw his vehicle. However, that didn't happen, as he drove straight into Jivan's car and continued on his way. As the truck crossed the bridge, the dragon regained consciousness and his strength returned. The first thing he did was jump from the vehicle and return to attack all the cars chasing him. At that moment, the dragon stood on the bridge and began to breathe fire, burning the entire bridge. The car in front of the dragon belonged to Jack and Dries, and they had nothing to do with it. Just at that moment, Bite reached the dragon and told him not to harm them because they were good people and he loved them. At that moment, the dragon stopped breathing fire. Unfortunately, the entire bridge collapsed, and Dries and Jack were about to fall from the bridge with their vehicle. But at the last moment, the dragon rushed and supported their car so it wouldn't fall. However, as they attempted to get out of the vehicle, the bridge couldn't withstand it, and they fell off, taking the dragon with them. Everyone was shocked by what had happened, believing that Jack, Dries, and the dragon had all perished. Suddenly, the dragon soared in front of them, with Jack and Dries on its back, and landed on the road, where Jack and Dries descended in front of Bate and Natalie. Bate was overjoyed, and the first thing he did was hug the dragon. At that moment, everyone witnessed what had happened and realized that the dragon was not harmful. Even Jivan felt regret and understood that what he had done was wrong, and that the dragon didn't deserve that treatment. Shortly thereafter, police helicopters arrived on the scene. Bate, fearing for the dragon, climbed onto its back and told it to flee quickly. After that, Bate and the dragon returned to the cave to stay there, but when they arrived, they found their cave destroyed. The dragon sensed that Bate didn't care about it and wanted to return to live with humans. So, the dragon decided to take Bate back to his home to live with them because his life there would be better. Indeed, afterward, the dragon brought Bite back, and as soon as Jack and Dries saw him, they were overjoyed because they thought they would never see him again. After bringing Bite home, the dragon also left to continue his life. A year after that incident, Jack and Dries had married, and Bate lived a happy life, always playing with Natalie. After a while, Bate took them all to check on the dragon. When he arrived at the dragon's place, he discovered that the dragon had also married and had small dragons. When he saw these little dragons, he was extremely happy because the dragon was living a happy life as well. If you have reached this point, I hope you subscribe to the channel and give it a like. See you in the next episode. Bye!